want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and try to remember a very specific sound or smell from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rich, earthy scent of roasted sweet potatoes drifting through a cold winter street, or the rhythmic, comforting ticking of the heavy wooden clock in your grandfather's living room. Welcome back to a time when life in Egypt was completely different. Today we are going to take a slow, beautiful walk down memory lane to revisit 20 forgotten details from the 1970s and 1980s. These are the small, everyday rituals that defined an entire generation. By the time we reach the final memory, you might just find yourself shedding a happy tear for the incredibly magical nights we once shared. Before we begin our journey, we must remember how differently time used to flow back then. In the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, there was absolutely no rush. Time moved slower, heavier, and with much more purpose. We did not have instant messaging or mobile phones that demanded our constant attention. Instead, we understood the profound value of waiting. We waited for a letter in the mail, we waited a whole week for our favorite television show, and we waited for our loved ones to arrive without knowing exactly when they would step through the door. There is a modern myth that because we lacked today's advanced technologies, we somehow lived a poorer life. But those of us who were there know the absolute truth. We were incredibly wealthy. We were rich in patience, rich in deep, meaningful conversations, and rich in the kind of sincere human connection that you simply cannot find on a screen. Life was physically simpler, but emotionally, it was a masterpiece. Let us begin with the early morning hours, long before the sun had fully risen over the bustling streets. Do you remember the comforting, heavy steps of the neighborhood Bawab echoing in the stairwell? It was a daily ritual we took for granted. He would bring up the daily newspaper and the fresh, piping hot Aish Baladi, wrapped carefully in a plain sheet of paper. The smell of that bread, baked in traditional ovens with a generous coating of bran on the bottom, is something that modern bakeries simply cannot replicate. You could feel the rough texture of the warm crust against your fingertips. We would tear a piece off while it was still steaming, sometimes dipping it quickly into a small plate of white cheese and olive oil, or perhaps some rich black honey. It was not just breakfast, but a grounding start to the day. The Bawab knew everyone, acting as the silent guardian and the vital link of the building. His morning greetings, carrying the subtle scent of strong black tea and local tobacco, made you feel safe. Those mornings were unhurried, wrapped in a sense of community that started right at your front door, reminding you that you belong to a close-knit family, even outside your own apartment. Now let us recall those magical Thursday evenings that brought the entire country to a standstill. Once a month, the streets of Cairo, Alexandria, and every village in between would empty out. Everyone, from shopkeepers to doctors, hurried home to gather around the wooden, fabric-covered radio set. The glowing dial of the radio was the centerpiece of the living room. As the deep, resonant voice of the announcer introduced the star of the East, Kulthum, a collective hush fell over the nation. You could hear the faint crackle of the static before the grand orchestra played its first majestic notes. The scent of roasted seeds and hot tea with fresh mint filled the air as families sat in rapt attention. We did not just listen to the music, we lived it. When she repeated a single verse over and over, each time with a new, breathtaking variation, you could hear neighbors from the open windows sighing and exclaiming in pure admiration. It was a shared emotional journey that lasted well past midnight. That radio was not merely an electronic device. It was a bridge connecting millions of beating hearts in a single, unified rhythm of profound love and deep longing. Close your eyes and listen carefully to the sounds of the midday street. Among the distant car horns and the chatter of children, there was one unmistakable rhythmic chant that every Egyptian child of the 1970s knew by heart. It was the call of the Roba Bekia man. Pushing his heavy wooden cart through the narrow alleys and wide avenues alike, his voice would rise up to the balconies, calling out for old clothes, broken radios, and discarded furniture. The slow squeak of the cartwheels and the clinking of metal items he had already collected created a unique urban symphony. When you had something to trade, the interaction was a masterful dance of negotiation. We would lean over the ornate wrought iron railings of our balconies, shouting down to him to wait. The items we gave away were traded not for money, but often for simple, joyous treasures. Sometimes it was a small live chick for the children to raise, or a shiny glass bowl for the kitchen. The Robabekia man was a master recycler long before the term was even invented. He took our forgotten past and gave it new life, his fading voice echoing down the street as a comforting reminder of the cycle of life. Let us turn our memories to the heavy, wooden-encased television set that occupied a place of honor in the living room. In those days, we did not have hundreds of channels or remote controls. We only had Channel 1 and Channel 2. Do you remember the physical effort of turning the stiff plastic dial, feeling the satisfying clunk as it clicked into place? But the true magic happened in the late afternoon. After finishing our schoolwork, we would sit cross-legged on the patterned carpet, waiting patiently for the broadcast to begin. The screen would flicker to life with the national anthem, followed by a recitation from the Quran, and then, the moment every child waited for, the cartoon hour. Whether it was the adventures of Captain Majid or classic imported shows dubbed in Arabic, those 30 minutes were sacred. We watched with wide eyes, completely absorbed, while the smell of our mother cooking garlic and coriander for dinner drifted in from the kitchen. There was a profound beauty in this shared anticipation. We all watched the exact same programs at the exact same time, which meant that the next morning at school, every single child had the exact same stories to discuss. As the hot summer faded and the crisp, cool winds of winter began to sweep through the city streets, a specific, intoxicating aroma would announce the change of the season. It was the deep, earthy smell of sweet potatoes, or batata, roasting slowly in a wood-fired oven. The batata vendor would park his heavy metal cart on the street corner, a small chimney releasing a continuous ribbon of fragrant white smoke into the chilly evening air. Do you recall the comforting warmth of holding that roasted sweet potato in your hands? The vendor would carefully pull the largest ones from the glowing embers, using long metal tongs, expertly slicing them down the middle and wrapping them in a piece of old newspaper. The blackened, slightly charred skin gave way to a bright orange center that was unimaginably sweet and steaming hot. We would stand right there on the pavement, blowing on our fingers, taking small bites to avoid burning our tongues. The heat from the cart provided a small sanctuary against the winter breeze. It was a simple, incredibly cheap treat, yet it warmed our bodies and our souls in a way that no expensive modern dessert could ever possibly match today. Think back to the joyous occasions of your youth, the engagements, the successful school results, or the arrival of a new baby. No such celebration in 1970s Egypt was ever complete without a tray of ice-cold sharbat. This vibrant ruby-red syrup, usually made from roses or strawberries, was the ultimate symbol of happiness and hospitality. When guests arrived, the host would bring out the finest, most delicate glass cups, reserved only for special days. Do you remember the sharp clink of the ice cubes hitting the thin glass as the thick syrup was vigorously stirred with cold water? The drink was intensely sweet, leaving a lingering floral taste on your palate and a bright pink tint on your lips. Carrying the heavy silver tray around the living room to serve the elders was a rite of passage for many of us. We walked carefully, holding our breath, terrified of spilling a single drop on the ornate salon furniture. Offering a glass of sharbat was our traditional way of saying that our joy was overflowing, and we wanted to share the sweetness of life with you. It was love, tradition, and celebration, all poured into a simple, beautiful glass of rosé-scented water. Let us take a stroll down memory lane to those sweltering summer evenings, driving slowly along the crowded Corniche or through the bustling streets of downtown. As the traffic slowed to a crawl, a gentle, intoxicating fragrance would suddenly cut through the heavy scent of car exhaust. It was the smell of fol, the pure white Arabian jasmine. Young boys and girls would weave between the idling cars, carrying long wooden sticks draped with dozens of these delicate, hand-strung flower necklaces. You would roll down the heavy manual car window, hand over a few piastres, and hang the necklace over the rearview mirror. Almost instantly, the entire car would be filled with this sweet, cooling aroma. Do you remember how the white petals felt so soft and cool against your skin if you wore it around your wrist? The smell of fall is the true essence of an Egyptian summer night. As the days went by, the flowers would slowly turn yellow and dry out, but many of us left them hanging there until the scent completely faded. It was a fleeting, natural luxury that brought a moment of peace and breathtaking beauty into the chaotic, noisy rush of our everyday urban lives. Now let us remember the simple thrill of Thursday mornings, the day the new issues of Mickey and Samir magazines would finally hit the local newsstands. Long before the internet and video games, these colorful, faintly smelling paper pages were our absolute greatest escape. Do you recall the feeling of clutching a few coins in your sweaty palm, running to the small wooden kiosk on the corner of your street? The vendor, surrounded by towering stacks of newspapers and magazines, always knew exactly what you were looking for. The smell of the fresh ink and the cheap, slightly rough paper was simply intoxicating. We would eagerly open the pages to follow the localized adventures of our favorite characters, reading the jokes, solving the puzzles, and looking at the pen pal requests in the back pages. Sometimes, we would carefully cut out the paper toys or masks included in the middle spread. Siblings would fight over who got to read it first, and we would trade old issues with our classmates at school. Those magazines did not just entertain us, they expanded our imaginations and taught us the pure, unadulterated joy of getting lost in a good, beautifully illustrated story. Do you remember the heavy, solid presence of the rotary dial telephone sitting proudly on a small table in the hallway? It was not something you carried in your pocket. It was a piece of furniture, an anchor for the whole household. Using it was a very deliberate, physical act. You had to place your finger in the small circular hole, pull the plastic dial all the way to the metal stopper, and listen to the mechanical whirring sound as it spun back into place. But perhaps the most nostalgic detail of all was the tiny metal padlock. Because long-distance calls were incredibly expensive, parents would secure the dial with a small brass lock to prevent unauthorized use. Making a call required permission, and having a conversation meant standing in the hallway where everyone could hear you. There was no privacy, but there was a deep sense of connection. When the phone rang, its loud metallic bell echoed through the entire house, and there was a rush of excitement to see who was on the other end. We memorized the phone numbers of all our friends and relatives. Those numbers are still etched deeply in our minds today, even when we cannot remember what we had for breakfast this morning. Let us pause and reflect on the lost art of the afternoon siesta. In the 1970s and 80s, life had a completely different rhythm, one that respected the heat of the day and the need for rest. Between the hours of 2 and 5 in the afternoon, a heavy golden silence would descend upon the streets of Cairo and Alexandria. Shops would pull down their metal shutters with a loud clatter, and the bustling markets would temporarily sleep. Inside the cool, darkened apartments, the wooden shutters were drawn tight against the blazing sun, leaving only thin, dusty streaks of light across the tiled floors. The only sound in the house was the rhythmic, comforting hum of the metal ceiling fan slicing through the warm air. Everyone retreated to their rooms to rest after a heavy lunch. As a child, being awake during this time felt like a secret adventure. You had to tiptoe across the floor, whispering so as not to wake the sleeping adults. This collective pause was a beautiful, necessary reset. It was a time when the world simply stopped demanding our attention, allowing our minds and bodies to recharge before the vibrant social life of the Egyptian evening began. Think about the sheer, bubbling anticipation of the night before Eid. The house was spotless, smelling faintly of soap, rosewater, and freshly baked kak coated in powdered sugar. But the true magic happened when the sun finally came up. Do you remember the feeling of putting on your brand new clothes? The stiff collars, the shiny new shoes that we proudly paraded around the neighborhood. We would wake up early to the sound of the takbir echoing beautifully from the local mosque, a sound that filled the heart with overwhelming joy. After the morning prayers, the most anticipated moment arrived, the Aidiyah. The older relatives would reach into their pockets and pull out crisp, brand-new banknotes that had never been folded before. The smell of that new money was the smell of freedom and endless possibilities. We would carefully fold the paper bills, tucking them safely into our pockets, feeling incredibly rich. The rest of the day was spent buying cheap plastic toys, riding the decorated street swings, and eating sweet treats until our stomachs ached. It was a day of pure, unfiltered happiness, where the entire community came together to celebrate the simple blessing of being alive. Let us wander down to the heart of the neighborhood, the local ahwa, or coffee house. It was not just a place to drink tea, it was the social parliament of the street. Long before the era of modern enclosed cafes, the ahwa spilled out onto the pavement with its small wooden chairs and wobbly tin tables. As you walked past, your senses were immediately hit by the sweet, thick aroma of apple shisha smoke, mixing with the sharp scent of dark roasted coffee. Do you remember the unmistakable soundtrack of the ahwa? It was the loud, rapid clacking of the backgammon dice hitting the wooden board, followed by the triumphant shouts of the players. The waiters balanced towering trays of small glass cups filled with dark tea and fresh mint, shouting orders over the din of the crowd. Men gathered there after a long day of work to discuss politics, football, and daily life. It was an open-air living room where everyone knew your name, your family, and your business. The ahwa was a testament to our deep-rooted need for connection, a place where time slowed down, and the simple act of sitting together was the most important event of the entire day. Now let us recall a simple household object that feels like a relic from another world, the olla. Before refrigerators became common in every single home, this humble, unglazed clay pitcher was our main source of cold drinking water. It usually sat on a balcony ledge or near an open window, perfectly positioned to catch the passing breeze. Do you remember the rough, porous texture of the clay beneath your hands when you lifted it? The genius of the olla was in its natural cooling system. As the water slowly seeped through the porous clay and evaporated on the outside, the water inside remained incredibly, refreshingly cold. But it was not just about the temperature, it was about the taste. Water from an olla had a distinct, earthy flavor that was remarkably sweet and deeply satisfying. When you came in from playing outside in the blazing heat, thirsty and exhausted, tipping the olla back and letting that cold, earthy water rush down your throat was pure heaven. It connected us to the mud of the Nile, to the very earth of our country. It was a simple, ancient technology that nurtured our bodies and provided a rustic comfort that modern plastic bottles can never replicate. Let us take a nostalgic ride on the old, colorful trams that used to dominate the streets of Alexandria and the leafy avenues of Heliopolis. These were not the sleek, sealed metal tubes of today. They were loud, rattling, open-door carriages painted in bright blues and yellows. Do you remember the thrilling feeling of hopping onto the tram while it was still slowly moving? We would stand by the open doors, feeling the warm wind rushing through our hair, watching the city blur past. The conductor, balancing expertly as the carriage swayed side to side, would punch your small paper ticket with a loud click. The smell of the metallic rails and the occasional spark from the overhead wires created a sense of daily adventure. You could hear the loud, distinctive bell ringing to clear people off the tracks. Sitting on those hard wooden benches, you were practically shoulder to shoulder with people from all walks of life. We watched the beautiful historic architecture of the city glide by through the open windows. The tram was the pulsing, metallic heartbeat of the city, moving us forward while letting us feel completely immersed in the vibrant life of the streets around us. Let us turn our minds to the most sacred ritual of the Egyptian week, the Friday family lunch. In a time when the weekend was truly a weekend, Friday was a day dedicated entirely to family and food. From the early morning, the house would be filled with the rich, intoxicating smells of cooking. Do you remember the sharp scent of garlic and coriander sizzling in ghee? The famous tasha, waiting to be poured over a bubbling pot of dark green molokhia. The dining table would be extended to its maximum length to accommodate aunts, uncles, and cousins. The centerpiece was always a massive platter of carefully rolled stuffed vine leaves, or mashi, steaming hot and smelling faintly of lemon and fresh herbs. The clinking of silverware and the loud, overlapping conversations created a symphony of domestic bliss. Everyone talked at once, laughing, arguing, and passing dishes across the table. We did not eat in front of televisions or stare at small screens. We looked at each other. After the heavy meal, we would all migrate to the living room, sipping hot black tea to help digestion, feeling deeply content, wrapped in the warm, secure embrace of our extended family. Do you remember the tactile joy of the cassette tape? In the late 70s and 80s, these small rectangular pieces of plastic were our most prized possessions. We would organize them carefully in wooden racks, fixing any unspooled tape by gently winding it back with a standard hexagonal pencil. But nothing captures the spirit of that era quite like the rise of Ahmed Adawiya. His voice, singing about the working class with infectious, upbeat rhythms, suddenly seemed to pour out of every microbus, taxi, and small street kiosk in the country. We would slide his tape into a bulky, portable stereo or a car deck, pressing the heavy, mechanical play button with a satisfying click. The slightly muffled analog sound quality only added to the raw emotion of the music. We would spend hours making mixtapes for our friends, waiting by the radio to press record exactly when our favorite song came on, hoping the presenter would not talk over the ending. Holding a cassette tape meant holding a carefully curated piece of someone's heart. It was a physical manifestation of music that you could carry in your pocket, trade with your friends, and play until the tape literally wore out. Let us pause and remember the simple pleasure of visiting the local grocery shop to buy a cold bottle of soda. Long before plastic bottles ruined the environment and our sense of nostalgia, soft drinks came in beautifully curved, heavy glass bottles. Do you recall the distinctive logos of local favorites like Spiro Spathis with its iconic fly symbol, or the sharp, refreshing bite of Krush? The shopkeeper would pull the icy bottle from a large, deep chest freezer, popping the metal cap off with a built-in opener that dropped the cap into a small bucket below with a metallic ping. The glass would immediately frost up in the warm air, and the condensation would drip down your fingers. Drinking from a glass bottle just tasted better. The carbonation felt crisper, the sweetness more intense. But there was a catch. You could not take the bottle home unless you paid a deposit. So we would stand right there on the pavement, gulping down the sweet liquid while chatting with friends, before handing the empty, sticky glass bottle back to the vendor. It was a small daily ritual that forced us to stop, take a refreshing break, and enjoy the present moment before moving on. Cast your mind back to the chilly early mornings of our school days. Do you remember the heavy dark brown canvas bags we strapped to our backs, filled with hardcover textbooks and small chalkboards? But the most vivid memory of all is surely the smell of the school lunch our mothers prepared with so much love. It was the unmistakable aroma of fresh fino bread, split open and stuffed with slices of sharp, salty, roomy cheese, or perhaps some pastrami. The sandwiches were tightly wrapped in soft, white paper napkins that would inevitably stick to the bread by the time the recess bell finally rang. When the bell echoed through the schoolyard, there was a mad dash to the playground. We would sit on the dusty concrete steps, trading halves of our sandwiches with our best friends. The cheese would have slightly melted into the soft bread from sitting in the bag all morning. We played simple games with marbles or jump ropes, getting our knees dirty and our uniforms wrinkled. Those school days were strict, the teachers were feared, but the friendships we forged over shared fino sandwiches and scraped knees in that crowded playground remain some of the purest, strongest bonds of our lives. Let us look up at the intricate, beautifully crafted wrought iron balconies that adorned the facades of our old apartment buildings. These balconies were not just architectural features, they were the very lungs of the home and the ultimate neighborhood watch. Do you remember the rough, peeling paint on the metal railings? In the mornings, mothers would step out in their house robes, hanging the wet laundry on the wooden clothespins, leaning over to exchange the morning news, gossip, and recipes with the neighbors on the adjacent balconies. Voices would carry across the narrow streets, creating a web of continuous, lively conversation. In the evenings, families would bring out small wooden chairs, eating sunflower seeds and watching the world go by below. You could see the glow of cigarettes in the dark and hear the muted sounds of televisions drifting from open French doors. The balcony was our connection to the outside world, a safe vantage point from which we observed the theater of the street. It was a time when privacy was less important than community, and looking out of your window meant looking directly into the lives, struggles, and joys of the people who shared your street. Finally, let us transport ourselves back to the deeply spiritual and joyous nights of the holy month of Ramadan. The streets were adorned with colorful, handmade paper fawanis, glowing warmly against the night sky. But the most unforgettable detail of those nights occurred during the quiet, pre-dawn hours. Do you remember waking up to the rhythmic, hypnotic beating of a small drum? It was the Masaharati walking slowly down the dark street. He did not just chant generic prayers, he knew every single family by name. We would rush to the open windows, our eyes heavy with sleep, just to hear him call out our names, urging us to wake up for suhoor. The night air was incredibly peaceful, filled with the faint smells of foul madams being prepared in the kitchens around us. Seeing the Masaharati wrapped in his heavy shawl, his voice echoing in the silence, made us feel intimately seen and cared for by the community. It was a beautiful, deeply human alarm clock. That sound is etched into our souls forever, a powerful reminder of a time when faith and tradition were woven seamlessly into the fabric of our daily lives, connecting us all in a shared journey of devotion and love. As we open our eyes and return to the present day, it becomes clear that we do not just miss the old glass bottles, the wooden radios, or the unpaved streets. What we truly miss is our youth, the unhurried passage of time, and the deep, unbreakable bonds we shared with our neighbors and families. We miss a time when a simple roasted sweet potato could bring immense joy, and when knowing the name of the person walking down your street was the most normal thing in the world. If these memories brought a warm smile to your face, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It helps us continue to keep these beautiful stories alive. And now, I would love to hear from you. Which of these 20 forgotten details do you miss the most? Or what is your own absolute favorite memory of growing up? Please share your beautiful stories in the comments below so we can remember together.